Let's talk about trilogies. Normally when I make one of these videos, I'm here to tell you about the correct way to use some sort of a literary device or the precise definition of a word and how it's supposed to be used. This week, friends, I am willing to admit that this is less about some sort of pedantic correct definition and more about my preferred usage of a word. That said, I think we've all gotten way too lax about how we use the word trilogy. A lot of people use the word trilogy to refer to any series that happens to have 3 installments. Iron Man, The Mighty Ducks, The Godfather, Austin Powers. That's the only time you'll find all of those movies on the same list, by the way. The problem I have with that is, although it's a technically acceptable use of the word, that's not really what I think of when I think of a trilogy. To me, a true trilogy is a single story that's told in 3 installments. J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, of course, is the classic example of a trilogy. The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, The Return of the King combine to make a single story. It's not 3 separate stories, one after another. It is one story. In fact, Tolkien always intended for them to be published in one book. It was the publisher who told him that 500,000 words, maybe it'd be better if we broke it up into a few different volumes. Tolkien was never happy about that, but it's arguably responsible for the proliferation of trilogies in fiction ever since. If you have 3 installments that don't really have any connection other than having the same characters, to me that's less of a trilogy and more just a series that happened to stop after part 3. People love to call the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire movies the Spider-Man trilogy, but is it really? Each movie has its own self-contained story with little to do with the other 2 parts except for having the same characters. And granted, there are a few character arcs that do carry over from one movie to another, especially with Harry Osborn, but they're not conceived as part of a larger story. It wasn't even intended to stop at 3. The first movie came out and it was good, and they made a second one. The second one came out and it was great, and they made a third one. The third one came out and it was profitable, so they decided to start coming up with ideas for a 4th. But while they were working on the 4th movie, Raimi and the producers couldn't come to an agreement. Tobey Maguire was suffering from back problems from an injury, and eventually they just decided to reboot the whole thing. That just isn't what I think of when I think of a trilogy. Now, sometimes a story can begin as a standalone and become a trilogy. The original Back to the Future, for example, was not written with future installments in mind. Once it became clear that the movie was a hit, they went back to the drawing board and hammered out 2 more stories, which they filmed back to back and had a definitive ending because they were worried that Michael J. Fox was going to get too old to convincingly play a teenager. Little did they know that he had already stopped aging in 1987. But wait, you're saying, they must have known there were going to be sequels. The first movie ended with "To be continued." Yes, it does. Now. But something that a lot of people don't know is that this wasn't in the original theatrical cut of the movie. Once the movie came out and it was clear that they were going to want to make sequels, they went and added the "To be continued" for the home video release and every subsequent release. But if you could get into your DeLorean and travel back to the 4th of July weekend 1985, you'd watch this movie and there would be no "To be continued" at the end. In fact, the creators of the movies later said that if they had known there were going to be sequels, they wouldn't have ended the first movie with Jennifer getting in the car with Marty in the dock. Because they just couldn't figure out what to do with her. That's the reason that Jennifer gets sidelined so quickly in part 2. That said, Back to the Future is probably the best example of this sort of retroactively created trilogy that there is. Now, calling something a trilogy just because it has 3 parts doesn't seem right to me. And let's not even get started on the words duology and quadrology. Yeah, maybe they're technically correct, but they just sound really stupid. You know what a series that stops at 2 is? It's an attempted trilogy. A series that stops at 4, waiting for the green light for 5. Look at Douglas Adams in his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy. Go ahead, count them. Yeah, the Hitchhiker's trilogy has 5 books. But in this case, it actually works as part of the irreverence of the series. The Hitchhiker's books were in no way planned as a trilogy, or for that matter, in any other fashion either. The first 2 books were Adams' adaptations of his own radio series, which stopped at an arbitrary point in the middle because Douglas Adams never met a deadline he didn't ignore. Eventually, his publisher got sick of waiting and told him to turn in whatever page he had finished that day, and that's where the first book ended. The third volume, Life, the Universe, and Everything, was actually a story that Adams had written for an episode of Doctor Who that was never filmed. So he took the basic premise and repurposed it into a Hitchhiker story. And the 5th book, Mostly Harmless, was created from bitterness. Seriously, Adams was in a very bad place when he wrote this, and it ends on a very sour note. Adams himself later regretted this and intended to write a 6th book that would give the series a happier ending, but he suffered from what TV Tropes calls author existence failure. Owen Colfer would later write a 6th book to end the series, which wasn't bad, but it wasn't Adams. My point is, you can call it the Hitchhiker's Trilogy because using the word trilogy here makes as much sense as anything else in the trilogy. And it's funny. But if you've never read the series before, it's okay to stop after book 4. Anyway, trilogies are cool and all, and I love them. Let's just stop using the word trilogy so willy-nilly, shall we?
Is your trilogy finished yet, Daddy?
I'm working on it.